Welcome to Badaboom. I'm Chris. On this episode of the podcast, we have on Morgan and Owen Rosenblum, creators of Ramgod. Brothers Owen and Morgan talk about how their childhood influences led to the creation of a story that melds Death Race and Point Break. They discuss their approach and how they balance their brotherhood and being creative partners. Published through Massive, Ramgod hits comic shops July 24th. Listen in and bada boom. Hey, Owen and Morgan, how you guys doing?
Great. How are you?
Good, good. We're excited to talk to you about Ramgod and sort of your collaboration with Massive. What's that process been like? It's exciting to see sort of like what Massive has been doing to kind of take on projects like a Ramgod, especially now. I think people are looking for things that are different outside of sort of the superhero realm when it comes to comic books. So to kind of create this world, this cyberpunk world, what's it been like for you guys?
Hella
It's pretty
fun.
awesome. You want me to thank
You
you.
pick it up.
We're
Kick it
brothers,
up.
by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. We
Um,
can tell.
He's the older sibling. I'm the
it's
older
good
sibling.
to
Kick it
there
up.
that may not know that already. So yeah, Owen and I are blood brothers and co-creators and co-writers in this awesome series called Ramgod Cyberpunk, futuristic kind of crime action drama. Interesting backstory about like how it kind of got started. So I was working at Heavy Metal several years ago, and it was a title that we'd initially brought to Heavy Metal because some of the listeners and viewers out there might actually like be like, oh yeah, I saw this. It was supposed to come out through Heavy Metal and Whatnot Publishing, which was it's an affiliate of Massive, and like the company, it's kind of well documented now. It's out there that like the company kind of paused, and so did the project and Ramgod, which was pretty tough for us as creatives that this is our baby, right? This is not just like we were hired to write on an established IP. This was like a new series that we were giving birth to and bringing to the world. So it was difficult when we were like, well, what are we going to do about it? So after a while of like trying to get it back with the help of Massive, because Massive, they initially were like, we want to be part of this series. When they were looking at doing a partnership at one point with Heavy Metal, and they saw kind of the Rolodex or like all the different titles that were set to come out. And they kind of were like, what's this one? As in Ramgod. And we're like, oh, that's Ramgod. And they're like, oh, it's actually created by one of like the editors at the company. And so like it was supposed to go in the magazine initially. And then they were like, I think this needs its own series, like it to be kind of pulled from it and have its own sort of spotlight on it. And we were like, yeah, sounds good. So anyway, once the thing happened with Heavy Metal, and we were like, all right, well, Owen and I were determined to get it back and claw it back. We asked Massive, we're like, hey, if we can successfully get this back, like, do you guys still want it? And they're like, do we? Hell yeah. Like, we love this series. And so, long story short, we were able to get it back and brought it to Massive, and Massive was like, cool, let's go, baby. Ramgod time. So, they've been
They were always kind of sorry to chime in here, Morgan, but I'm going
yeah,
to do it as your younger sibling. Yeah, it was kind of like always a partnership made in heaven in terms of the like the Whatnot Massive kind of thing. And we always loved them. We always gravitated towards each other with doing this, and kind of with the stuff going on, as Morgan said, with Heavy Metal, it was kind of like a phoenix rising from the ashes kind of thing, where we were just like, this was our baby. This was our COVID baby. We actually had created it during COVID and written it. And then we were like, hey, we need to get this in the hands of breeders, and we'll do whatever we need to do to have it see the light of day. And yeah, and as Morgan said, we kind of clawed it back. We did what we needed to do, and Massive was obviously thrilled about that. And now we're kind of embarking on this new era of this partnership. But it is, it started in one way, and now it's in this way.
And that's super inspiring because I think, especially doing this podcast, we've talked to a lot of creators where they may set up a project at a particular publisher or partner, and because of the financial realities of the world these days, something goes under, and then sort of the rights get stuck somewhere, and then that's where the project kind of dies. So to kind of be in a position where not only were you able to kind of get it back, but also sort of expand on it, it seems, because it was supposed to be in the magazine, and now you sort of get this like, standalone series where Ramgod is sort of the thing. And I think with Heavy Metal, as great and of a company that was in terms of its history, sometimes I think like the stories, it's hard to kind of like stand out. So it
no,
does
that's a
seem
good
like
point.
it's like where it needed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have big plans for the series too. Like it's a 6-issue like mini arc right now, sort of like our season 1 introductory story arc for the series, but we've already like in building it, Owen and I like have plans for it to go well beyond that. And when you get to the end of it, you'll see like it closes one loop and then it like sets up a bunch of other new threads that we're going to be able to build upon, because this is an expansive world with some really cool characters, and just like it feels very lived in it. We always describe it as like a tight lens on a big world, so that like you feel like you're in it. And like the attention to detail that we put into it is like, I think you'll see it's pretty evident. One of the cool things that you'll see in like the single issues is that oh, this is also kind of interesting. So initially it was formatted to be like magazine sizing, like a much bigger pages, right? Because it was going in heavy metal. But like a traditional comic sized page is much more narrow and a little bit smaller. So we didn't want to chop off like the edges of the page. So instead what we did is we resized it down a little bit, and then it created like, this sort of like negative space in the top and bottom, which at first we were like, oh man, like how do we fill that space? And we came up with like what we think is a pretty cool solution for that, where we added these like sort of UI elements that almost feel like you as the reader or like wearing some sort of like augmented reality glasses, where you have like scrolling banners that's all in world stuff. So like if there's like a crime scene going on, that'll be like crime scene kind of like
kind of like think like almost like Iron Man meets like Ready Player One in that kind of like UI like Oasis kind of interface almost. But as we said, it's more like the Apple Vision kind of goggles, I guess.
But it's cool because it just heightens the story now, and it doesn't feel just like fillers. It like actually has substance and kind of teaches you a little. They're like little Easter eggs that we've planted throughout too, if you're paying attention. One of the other cool things that we do are these sort of like in-world ads. They're like fake advertisements for products that only exist in the world of Ramgod. That like they work as really good sort of like scene breaks.
Or like product placement shouldn't just exist in our world. Let it exist in the fictional world too, where we just flood everyone with advertising.
So like stuff like somehow.
Yeah, exactly. So they're like fun because they add elements and back like stuff to the backstory. And Mass has been having a really good time with like coming up with cool ideas for us to do with that kind of stuff too. Like a memo that they get, that the players get from the league, where that tells them that they have, because we talk about this in the book itself, like as part of the story part. One of the main things is that like all of the 8 teams in Ramgod, which is this new sport that we've introduced into this world, and they're in like their 3rd year, so they're still evolving, they're still kind of changing the rules up. And so the latest rule is that every team now needs to bring on a new, like a 5th player to their active roster. So we're Massive had the idea of like, what if we like actually like wrote out the memo that like was sent to all teams? That could be cool, because we talk about it, you never get to read it, and then there's like a fake ad or an in-world ad where it's like, oh, it's the memo of that they got. It's like, dear Ramgod,
it's just further world building really at the end of it. And that's an element Morgan and I absolutely love. We always think of things also as existing even beyond the comic format, and like how can you do different types of spinoff things and different types of mediums and whatnot that has fans and readers kind of engaging with the material in a variety of ways. We always love that. Like we think of kind of our favorite franchises from back in the day, from like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to Transformers to G.I. Joe and like all X-Men and all that stuff. And you could just have action figures. And, it's like as Mel Brooks says in Spaceballs, merchandise. It's just like, that's always on repeat in my brain,
But for anyone out there that hasn't like gotten to see much about Ramgod yet, like this is a character first series. Like it's always characters first for us, and I know we're like getting into the world and like the cool like fake ads and merchandise stuff, but like at its core it's really like a father-son story. The main protagonist in the story, Clint Bowler, is this former superstar athlete that was supposed to like go on to become like the equivalent of LeBron James but for the NFL, right? And it's kind of like was destined for greatness, but got involved with some shady people early on in his collegiate career. And when he gets drafted #1 overall to the NFL, but because he was implicated in some like some shady, nefarious, like stuff, he winds up getting like a lifetime ban from the sport, and like no sponsors will touch him. Like, so his entire life trajectory went from like being bright and shiny and awesome and a celebrity to like now being now what? And so the story actually begins 15 years later, where he's now like this sort of a deadbeat like dad and cop that's he's still a patrolman, right? After 15 years, he called in some favors to like get into the force to kind of clean up his act, and like he's got this like not a strange relationship with son, but definitely not a close one. He's got like limited custody of him. He gets to see him like once a month, and he doesn't know how to connect to his kid. But his kid is like this kid, his name is Malcolm, and Malcolm's like 15 years old and is a diehard Ramgod like fanatic. And his favorite team is the Barracudas, which are known as like the people's team, because there's 8 total teams in the league. And one of the teams is the Barracudas, who are the only ones that are not owned by like a big corporation. They're technically the people's team because they're crowd-funded, right? So there's like a Patreon type of platform that goes on. Like
They're the Green Bay Packers of the league.
Yeah, kind of.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But it's not just like state-based where like it's, you know, like not just like a hometown team gets it. It's like all the like you could be from anywhere, and if you know support the Barracudas, and you're what's called a guppy. That's what they call themselves, like the fans of the Barracudas. So like he's like guppy for life. And ultimately, Clint winds up getting an invitation to try out to become like the 5th player on the Barracudas, and like that now gives him an opportunity to sort of like get closer to his son, because now his son is all of a sudden seeing his dad in a completely different light, right? But what we find out, and this isn't so much a spoiler because it's kind of like the premise of the story, the Barracudas actually moonlight as bank robbers. And that's really how they get a lot of their funding, and then they launder it through the crowdsourcing platform. So they ultimately wind up getting this cop who has a nefarious dark past to sort of like get back into his roots, get back to his roots and join not only the team, but like they get him involved in like their criminal activity. And now it's slowly but surely like bleeding into his son, because his son is, by the way, his dream when he grows up is to become an engineer for Ramgod, and specifically for the Barracudas. And now he gets to sort of like do an internship almost with the Barracudas. So like there's a lot of pros going on for
a lot of boxes being checked.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like the deeper he gets into this world, like the more he's putting his own son at risk. So there's that.
It's like reverse. It's like reverse Fast and Furious, but it's still about family.
That is exactly right.
We call that out. Like we don't shy away from it. Like when you read it, I don't think anyone's gonna be like, what a ripoff of Fast and the Furious. It just has similar themes. Because instead of racing, it's like there's a racing component to Ramgod. By the way, for anyone who wants to know like what the sport of Ramgod actually is, it's a 3-prong or 3 like sort of factor competition, kind of like the Olympics to a degree. It's 1 part racing, and when I say racing, it can be like motorcycles, it can be hover runners, which are like hovering wave runners that can go on water or on land. It can be like these big monster truck type things. Like they switch up the vehicles all the time. So there's the racing heat. They're all called heats. There's the combat heat, which is like, fighting. And sometimes it's one-on-one in like a cage, like UFC. And other times it's like battle royale, WWE style. Except that like you can die in that. Not that no one's ever died in WWE, but like you get the point. It's pretty legit. Yeah. And then there's climb, right? And sometimes it's climbing like up a mountain, and other times it's descending down an active volcano or like an avalanche that was like triggered kind of thing. So it's got a very cool collaborative like element to it, and it also has different aspects because like during the regular season there's all 8 teams kind of competing, but then in the playoffs it's 4 teams, and in the finals is just 1 team versus another team.
Like think of like a super high tech like Ninja Warrior kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, this sounds like super exciting. As soon as you said Ninja Warrior, I was like, oh, this is definitely going to be it, because I used to watch that at 2 a.m. until like 4 a.m. It's too addicting to put down, and it sounds like this book is going to be like that as well. But I want to call back to something you said earlier that got me really excited when you said it's a small scope on the world through this series, and it's only 6 issues at the moment. We're kind of like at a weird point where a lot of stuff is making a really big comeback, especially like X-Men 97 bringing everything back. And with that series, like I've seen so many people be like, hey, we should bring back like what happened to Tron, what happened to Judge Dredd, and like all this cyberpunk stuff. And I was curious to know, like, if you guys have seen that trend as you are getting ready to release this book, if you've noticed those things coming back, and what's it feel like to be a part of riding that wave with this new series? Because I looked at the covers and I'm like, this looks like Tron, but also there's this Judge Dredd, kind of like Dirty Cop and RoboCop kind of stuff going on with it. So what's it feel like to be a part of the wave of, what it seems like a lot of people want coming out of pop culture these days?
That's a great question.
It's weird because it's like we're riding the wave, but we're we're not like rejuvenating another pre-existing IP or series, right? Like we've created our own, but you know, we grew up at the same time. We grew up being inspired by X-Men, like the original X-Men 97, like in the 90s, right? We used to have all of those like literally VHS cassettes, like we would collect them and stuff, and we watched every Saturday
morning.
You were the cool kids. You had all the VHSs. You're the cool kids.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I had the Power Rangers VHSs, so I was in another collection.
I think we had the
we had those two. We had them all.
Like
we don't play favorites.
We were like, we were dorks before it was cool to be a dork.
Yeah.
Like now it's like it's kind of celebrated, which is pretty awesome.
Right.
But to answer your question, like it's ironic because we've always said like we want to create our own stuff, like fresh stuff, but we want to create something that also feels nostalgic and familiar, but also fresh. And it's like, well, is that an oxymoron? Can that even happen? There's, you know, I read somewhere that like there's only so many stories when you really whittle it down that you can tell, right? There's like a redemption arc story. There's like the claiming of the sword story. There's, you know, like because the hero becomes the villain story, all those kinds of things. So it's like, how are you going to tell your story? And it's the characters and their experiences and the setting, right, of the world that makes that unique and different. But there's only so many you can tell. So like for us, we wanted to make sure that we were telling the story that we wanted to tell, but also, you know, channeling things from other greats. And I'm sure that as you read the book, you're going to be like, oh, that reminded me a little bit of X-Men, or like that reminded me a little bit of Power Rangers. Like there's little elements of everything that we grew up with in that. And we didn't like force it in. We weren't like trying to like jam was it like a square or a round hole or something like that? But
yeah, like round peg into a square
round peg into a square hole and stuff like that. But it was like we try to make it work where it feels like it fits. And we've had a really good team of collaborators. Like the artists that have worked on this project are insanely talented and extremely creative. And it's been a really fun process because it's not as simple as just like do exactly what's in the script. And like in some cases, you know, we would ask like, well, what would you do differently? Or they'll pitch us an idea like, hey, what if we told the story a little bit different in this scene from this perspective instead of the one that you had imagined? We're like, great idea. Because we have this motto, which is like best idea wins. We don't really have egos when it comes to creating content and creating like good stories. It's best idea wins. Whatever improves the story and the experience is like, that's what we care about.
1,000,000%.
Yeah. And that's why I really was excited about that small scope description you guys said, because all the influences you guys have described, I think you guys named probably already like 12 in this interview alone, and maybe additional 15 in another interview I saw. So when you guys take all those ingredients in, it's like, okay, 6 issues, but small scope means all those other ingredients can spread out into other aspects of this universe, which is what's really exciting too, because when I'm going to just manifest that this book is going to do well, that the other, when you zoom out and you get that bigger scope, it's like, oh, cool. We didn't get a touch on maybe that RoboCop or Judge Dredd like hint in that 6 issues, but I can see it coming over here. And so, you know, you guys have really done a lot to immerse the readers in the world so far, especially those little UI elements. Those are the things that I go back and be like, let me read this again and see what else is there. So I'm excited to see what comes out of the 6 issues and beyond that.
Layers here. There are layers here. And the tight lens on a big world kind of approach, that's something particularly Morgan really excels at. And I try to latch on and do what I can to help navigate it. But it's also, I mean, we're from New York City. So like that in and of itself is very much so like our own lives within this massive city is kind of taking, you know, we're seeing things through our tight lens on a big world and a big city type of thing. So like we tried to bring that approach when creating Ramgod, I think.
Right. Think of it this way. When you're inside of a big city, like you don't really see the skyscrapers, you just see like kind of walls and like, but when you zoom out or like when you're in New Jersey or something like that, or Queens, and then you look at the city, you see the skyline and you get to kind of get a bigger, wow, this is really expansive and huge and beautiful. So yes, we definitely have set the stage for a much bigger world to be explored. And we didn't get the opportunity to like, you know, tell all the little stories that we wanted to, but we've definitely planned for that. Because a big thing for us is like, we're master planners, I think. We don't just kind of like sit down and like, let's see what our fingers wind up typing up. Like we go into like, it's very methodical. We outline, we like, okay, what's the setting? What's the world? What is it?
It's like the Breaking Bad approach, you know, where you kind of have to understand your beginning, middle, and end. Like, not maybe initially, but you definitely like don't want to be like lost, which I was a lost fan, but like you get to the end and then they're just figuring it out as it goes.
Yeah.
And then you really disappoint the fans. And I just think like, don't drag it on so that it's so long that you kind of lose what its purpose is and the main story and the reason that why fans and people like it and love it. And for us, as Morgan said, we're meticulous planners. We like to kind of have our series planned out somewhat as much as we can in advance, and know when to kind of cut it off and then do spin-offs or expansions or whatever you need to do.
Like there, you'll see also there's like some cool B and C storylines that trickle throughout the narrative of the series that don't necessarily get the full resolution that you may like. It's almost like you'll see like a new villain type thing working in the shadows that will wind up becoming the main antagonist for season 2 by the end of it. And you're like, oh, okay, that's where that storyline was working towards, as opposed to everything always having like a major big payoff at the very end of season 1, because the goal is to make something special here that like we can continue and then bring on new collaborators and things like that. Like we think what we have here is special, and the people that have seen it thus far have been reinforcing that for us, and that's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, and what you brought up in terms of A and B and C storylines, I think that's something readers really want these days. I think sort of the problem with sort of like modern comics is that they sort of start and end in weird places. You know what I mean? There's not that build up or sort of like that investment. And I think fans can really invest in something that has like those B and C storylines, especially lately, like, doing this, like we'll kind of read things back of some of our guests. And I'm like, wait, like we had Jeff Johns on and I was reading his Flash run and I was like, there's things that pay off like among like 50 issues. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
I
that
feel
like
like more
set up.
rewarding of a journey, right? When you get
Yeah.
because you've been following it and then you're like, when is that going to pay off? Or I guess that was irrelevant, and you're like, no, it wasn't. Like, if you guys read or seen Game of Thrones?
Oh, I never was. Listen,
No?
Yeah.
once I saw there was like 10 names and 10 houses I needed to follow, like I
You
turned it
yeah,
off. But I'm
yeah.
sure there's things that pay off eventually.
Well, there's like little things that I never like, even like a character's name like Hodor, for anyone out there that is like,
Oh,
oh,
I know this one. I know
yeah,
that one.
Hodor. You're like, oh, we thought that was genius, where it's like that you find out why he's called a Hodor, and there's a really cool reason behind it, but it's like it's not relevant at all for like 8 seasons or like seasons, until finally you find out why it is relevant. You're like, that's the coolest freaking thing.
Yeah.
So we've planned for some stuff like that in there, but not everything is like a super slow burn. There's definitely some things that you're gonna get. Like I think we feed you just enough plot twists and reveals throughout the series where you're like, that's cool. In fairness too, it's not like the most insanely original concept. It's just like a cool interpretation of things that are somewhat familiar. Like because I don't know how old or young your primary like viewership is, but like the original Point Break movie, not the remake crap that they made recently.
Or Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are, it's again, if you really like compare the two and you try to say like, where's the concentric circles, or like what are they about? It's about like, okay, a group of bank robbers that are actually surfers, right? Like that's their day job kind of thing. And then a cop goes in to try to infiltrate it. And then the kind of the same thing with like Fast and the Furious, but they're racers, right? With ours, though, the key twist and the key difference for ours is that the cop is not undercover. He has no idea what he's signing up for, which is kind of cool.
Right.
Thought that was kind of neat.
It's like the inverted. It's like the inverted scenario, kind of.
Also, giving a shout out to our amazing story editor, like Joseph Illich, who's like a veteran in this, really heightened the story and brought and like challenged us as writers to like go further and to really craft a character and a set of characters that felt extremely relatable. And it's got that whole flawed hero approach where it's sort of like the guy gets in his own way and like in a lot of times, and is he, maybe he's trying to convince himself of one thing because like specifically like is Clint actually doing this to get close to his son, or is that just like a nice little benefit as a result? Is he really doing it? He misses the limelight and fame and like the adrenaline rush of like doing some illegal shit and like that level. So
yeah, good shout out, Morgan. Joe Illich is a legend, and he always pushed us to be better and to kind of think outside of the box and not be conventional. And another shout out to Trevor at Massive.
I was about to say, like, and then so you asked us earlier in the call, like, what was it like, or what's it been like working with Massive? So I haven't had this experience per se until recently, where it's like we had one story editor, an editor on a project that really helped shape it. And then now it gets, the project moves to a different publisher and they have their own editor and own ideas and things like that. And Trevor really brought some additional great ideas to the table, as well as did like Michael Calero and Kevin and their whole team. Like everyone that's been involved has had some input into this project and like has put their touch on it, which I think makes it really special.
Yeah. And I think Morgan said this earlier too, which is like we really like to, embody the mentality of best idea wins, like check your ego at the door kind of thing. Like, even though we're like, oh, well, we were the main creators on this, we're like, dude, if you have a great idea, tell us. We're like, all
There's
ears.
time to change it.
We want the story to be as good as humanly possible. And Morgan and I have very much so kind of embodied that attitude. We have other ventures too that we're working on where we consult fans and do beta tests all the time, because we were like, we wish that people did that more when we were growing up. And the things that we were huge fans of, like, ask the fan. They're the ones who love the material more than anything. They're the ones who probably have the best ideas and know the source material better than anybody.
Like you guys are hardcore like comic guys and readers and stuff like that. You probably know the space better than a lot of like people that are professional writers. I'm not saying you're like better writers than the great writers, maybe, I don't know. But the point is simply that like your experience has lent itself to make you experts in that, and to understand what makes something good and special, and what resonates with you probably will resonate with a lot of other people too.
Yep.
So that's
what's it been like for you two? Because what's really been cool about doing this interview is kind of hearing sort of Ramgod seems like the culmination of sort of like your brotherhood, all your experiences and stuff, and now you're sort of almost a month away from it sort of being in readers' hands. So what's that like, sort of be in that position where like for so long you guys were going back and forth? I'm sure there are a lot of ideas that like started and went into the can, and then Ramgod became the thing. So what's it been like to kind of get to this point where like all this hard work has gotten to this point where it'll finally get into the hands of fans?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. This has definitely been like, we were in the trenches for so long with this, both from like a creation standpoint and creatively, and then like obviously with the ups and downs of working with multiple publishers and whatever you need to do to get it in the hands of readers and finally to a release date. It's almost surreal, I would say. Like, it almost doesn't feel real until I will see it out there and like can purchase it and actually start seeing what fans really think about it, and good, bad, or in between. Like, that was always our goal, is we just want to get it out there and see how people respond to it. As we said, like, we're fans of all of this type of stuff anyway. And we took all of our different inspirations and just pulled it together and tried to make a cohesive story that was compelling and that people would like, and that people like us would like. Because as we said, we're big fans of this type of stuff. So
actually, that's like another thing too that I think not enough people in Hollywood and whatever really think about too much, which is like, make the story you want to tell, not for, like Owen was saying, yeah, we make it for the readers and stuff like that, but like we are also the readers, like we know what inspired us and what was awesome when we were growing up. So it's like, if we think it's pretty cool and it resonates with us, then hopefully it will resonate with other people too. So there's a big part of that too, which is like, do we love it? We made sure that we love the story. Like, you can probably see it on our faces, like hear it in our voices. Like, we're very passionate.
Definitely a labor of love. And we talked about also like the father-son dynamic between Clint and Malcolm. And I mean, like, being two sons and brothers, and like our relationship with our dad. And I know that like when we were kind of like 15 and 16, there was this interesting time period. And I think for a lot of like fathers with their sons or daughters or whatever, it's this almost like this disconnect. You're looking to try to find this middle ground to relate to each other. And we just thought that as like a time period and a phase, that's such an interesting thing to explore. And like that plays a huge part in Ramgod. And that's something that, at least in this series, that we really wanted to explore and kind of touch on and bring our own experiences kind of relating to our dad and finding that kind of commonality and whatnot, and kind of put a spotlight on it.
Also, just to like, for a little more context too. So like, we're the products of divorce. Now we were very fortunate where like our parents had split custody of us. We literally would bounce around from like one household to another every other week. So it was like half of our stuff was at our mom's, half of both of our parents remarried pretty soon after they got divorced from one another. Two awesome step parents. Like we're super great. Like it's a very good situation for us. But at the same time, we were 11 when it happened or something like that. And as we were teenagers, like you don't at the time, and I can't speak for everyone, but I certainly didn't really like understand that my dad was also a human being with feelings and emotions and weight and baggage that he's carrying and things like that. And there's definitely that, while the relationship between Clint and Malcolm is very different from the one that Owen and I had with our dad, I think that there's some sort of commonalities as just far as just you take a kid, a teenager, 15, Malcolm, in his formative years, who's still figuring himself out, trying to like, can he understand that his father is also a human being with flaws and makes mistakes and things like that. It's like it's both of them kind of like learning to become people and to understand one another too.
Yeah, and like life is gray, right, and full of nuances, and that's something that we believe in, and we're always like, nothing is so clearly like two things can be right at the same time, and they can coexist, and that push and pull kind of thing is something that we really wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I heard you guys describe that in another interview you guys did, and that was an interesting time in my life with my dad as well. So that's another reason again why I was like, man, I'm excited to dive into this. And like you said before, you've got lots of layers. It's a cake or a parfait that a lot of people are going to be. Yeah, it's a good Shrek reference there sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. A Trey's legend.
But I think it's gonna be a great book that people are really gonna dive into. There's lots, like you said, you got lots of A plots, lots of C plots, lots of problems for these characters to solve right off the bat. But when can people expect to get this comic? Like, when can we say, hey, go to your comic book shop, your LCS, and place this order? What's the final cutoff order date for this book?
The FOC final order cutoff date is June 24th, to my understanding, and that which means that you can go to your local comic shop right now and be like, hey, I heard about this new series called Ramgod, spelled Ramgod, just like it sounds. Can I get it? And the other cool thing too is Massive's big on like making a lot of covers, variant covers, because they're collectors, at heart, and so are we. Like, there's some really cool limited edition variants to check out and to get. So it's sort of like pick your poison when you go there. Like, which cover do you want? You can get all of them too if you like. Hopefully they'll be worth some money someday as well. So yeah, go to your local comic shops now. Tell them you want a copy or two or something like that, and then if this sounds cool to you, tell your friends about it too. So that the better it does, the more likely we're going to be able to continue it forward too.
Yeah, these are going to be as rare as X-Men, the original series on VHS someday, I bet. So you might want to just go ahead and get all those covers anyway.
Out to God's ears, brother. Absolutely.
And then 30 years later, right, you'll see them, someone else will come along and like reboot our series, which would be cool.
I'm happy you brought up X-Men 97. Like, what a gift. What a gift it's been.
If you look behind me.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Unbelievable. I love it.
We used to say this is the unofficial DC podcast, just because we used to cover a ton of DC stuff because we're big DC fans at heart. But honestly, after the last 3 months, we were like, hey, should we just start calling this the X-Men 97 podcast? Because that's like the first thing we talk about now.
Yeah, it's incredible. Absolutely.
I also love how they they paid homage to the original series, obviously, just like stylistically. I think they even had the exact same Rogue voice actress.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Wolverine is the same. I think everyone that's alive did their voices again, or they were recast in a smaller role. I think like Jean Grey was the senator or whatever. So they brought most of the cast back if they weren't playing their like main role. And I think the original Gambit was playing Cable this time.
Oh, that's cool.
And the original Jubilee was the older version of her in the video game episode.
Oh, that's cool.
I didn't even know that. Awesome.
Well,
I love how they did like the uniform updates. Like, those are always fun, right? They're like when Storm gets a new outfit or something like that, or they did the throwbacks this like towards the end of the season,
the Marvel Girl and all that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And then they weren't just them bringing in like Captain America and Iron Man, like just giving these like
cameos.
Cameos were great.
I saw Psylocke and stuff. You're like, ooh.
Yeah, just to see them all in the same thing. That was like, because the whole like Sony Marvel beef for so long was like, you can't touch this, and this is mine, and this is no Fantastic Four, no nothing. And then Morph is just doing everything for everybody. It was just kind of
Quicksilver speed.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just like, I remember a world where they could just show everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think X-Men 97 kind of gave, for me, some hope back to like what the MCU will maybe be one day, because it's like, guys, it was so easy to just do that in X-Men 97. You can't.
Not just you, brother. I think that was all the majority of
back,
people.
like Wildcats. I don't know if you guys ever watched that.
Oh yeah.
These Wildcats. So
Yeah.
No, bring it all back.
Yeah. Spawn HBO. That's what I want. That's what I want.
Listen, Keith. I think that's the problem. Keith David sent the bar. If they ever do another Spawn movie, they should just get a live action actor and just have Keith David do the voice.
Yeah. We're huge Spawn fans. Todd McFarlane is like,
that was, I think, my first like #1 issue comic that I ever got into, like from the start. Like our dad, like Owen and I just didn't like reading plain text, and so like our dad was like, well, you got to read something because it's good for you.
well, we were both like ADHD the hell out, so we're just like, we need something visually stimulating.
And comic
words on a page don't work enough for us. So
listen, they're picture books. That's what they are.
Trust me. Yeah, and I went into video production, brother. So like, I get that. Just
that's how my parents got me into reading a bit more. There's like, hey, look, like we don't really like a lot of the violence and stuff, but you can read all the Sonic comics and all the Archie comics that you can find at this grocery store, and we'll count that a win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure.
So like,
hey guys,
Owen was mentioning before, right, that like this summer is like big summer. You were asking like, what's it like having the book come out? For context, like I'm not like trying to toot my own horn here, just laying out the facts. Which is, I've worked on several like comics and books before. I've been published before. This is Owen's first one as like a co-author, so it's like pretty special. And this is also our first book as brothers that we are like co-writing exclusively together.
So, I'm like a producer by trade, so technically for the majority of my life and career, I've been making other people's creative visions a reality, and almost like neglecting my own. And Morgan's always been like the superstar creative who was always like the writer making his own stuff, and then I was like making other people's, and I was like, but I want to make something. At this itch that I needed to scratch, and then as we said, during like COVID, I started doing Ramgod, and I was like, Morgan,
actually, in fairness to
you know way more about this than I do. You're the character guy. I love world building and whatnot. I think by our powers combined, we're Captain Planet. So yeah,
another great reference.
Another. Absolutely. We're all about nostalgia. So yeah. Cool.
Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we could keep going for like another 30 minutes just about the things that have influenced and how they're all making a great comeback in this day and age.
Totally.
Can't wait to see what the first issue of Ramgod has in store and what the other 5 issues unfold for the characters. But until that time, we'll be going to our local comic store, ordering as many variants as we can get our hands on, and we'll be excited for the release in June. And with that, Badaboom.
Badaboom.
Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at Badaboom podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.